You've been hearing ads for Zencastr these past months. Interested in sponsoring this show or podcast ads for your business? Go to zen.ai/The Archaeology Show and fill out the contact information so Zencastr can help you bring your business story to life.
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Archaeotech Podcast, episode 178. I'm your host, Chris Webster, with my co-host, Paul Zimmerman. Today we talk about Paul's recent trip to Iraq and how his tech plan worked out. Let's get to it. All right, everybody, welcome to the podcast. Paul, welcome back to the States.
Why, thank you. How you doing?
Good. Yeah, we're down in Cabo San Lucas, Mexico again, where we were a few months ago, except an Airbnb this time, just kind of hanging out, sort of somewhat local style, I guess. Mm-hmm. Better than a resort anyway. So yeah, it's nice down here.
Good weather, nice and sunny.
I looked at the weather and it was like 75 to 76 literally every day that we're here for the high. And it was just perfect. It's like zero fluctuation. So it's nice, but it's always like that down here. That's one of the reasons why we like it. You know, it gets hot and humid in the August, September timeframe and the rains come. But aside from that, it's pretty much the same weather all year round. And it's just great.
Nice. How long are you going to be there?
We're here for 2 weeks total. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Last half of April altogether. So yeah, we got like basically free plane tickets because I still had a bunch of miles and credits from the COVID year and a pretty good deal on this Airbnb. So, I mean, it's almost just as affordable as being anywhere else. So we're like, well, we've got a free place to park the RV. It's at my parents' house. Our solar panels are keeping the refrigerator and everything else running. And we're like, well, if we're not paying for that there, let's just go somewhere else and just work from here. So that's what we're doing.
Awesome. Well, yeah. I'm glad you can do that.
Yeah, indeed. So, all right. Well, we're going to talk about your recent excursion. We obviously talked a few podcasts about your setup for your technical approach, I guess, to the recent phase of the Lagash archaeological project in Iraq. So why don't we start by, I guess, can you do like a brief what your plan was in just a few minutes, and then we'll talk about how that went and just some challenges and, you know, wins and losses and things you would change next time. But let's start by saying, what was your original plan for getting the survey done? Okay,
well, the survey was one part of the project. We have, it's gearing up to be a bigger long-term excavation with associated projects on it too, and so I've brought in as kind of the go-to tech guy. So we had various components. I was there in the fall for a very brief season. We had 2 weeks there where I was tasked with making a topographic map with a drone of the entire site. And so we accomplished that. And we had then other things that we learned about from doing that we wanted to experiment both with drones, and then also we wanted to explore the overall use of the site, the development of the site over time. So I devised a surface survey that we could, if it worked the way I expected, we would be able to get a huge swath of this site done over the season. And for, anybody's record, it's a very large site. It's over 450 hectares, the main part of the tell. So, there's a lot of surface area to cover. And back in episode 170, I talked about what I was thinking of doing, and I was taking some of the better ideas I've seen since I started on CRM last year, a little under a year ago now, and then tried to bring those ideas back into the academic archaeology that we're going to be doing, specifically with respect to this surface survey. So back in episode 170, I was talking about devising a plan for doing a surface survey using pre-plotted collection points. So I laid a grid across the entire site, got the coordinates, the GPS coordinates, and then with iPads with GPS on them, anybody on the survey team would basically go across the site, plant themselves on the target location. Each target location had its own name, unique name. They would plant a stake in the ground. I originally was thinking of a 2-meter tether, but we ended up reducing that down to 1 meters, and just doing a circle around the stake with that tether, collecting everything inside that area circumscribed by the tether, and then mark it by the location and come back and then process the data.
I was just wondering, using that sampling method, do you know what percentage of the area you're actually sampling with that method?
Yeah. So the initial idea was with that 2 meter tether. So that'd be a 4 meter diameter circle. I because it's just math, right? I know the size of the site. I know how many points there are. So I tested in GIS a whole bunch of different grid sizes, and then also some different tether sizes, the circles, the catchments at each grid point. And, then I could just put that in a spreadsheet and see how much it was going to be. So with that initial plan, with the 4 meter diameter catchments, it was going to be just about 0.5% of the entire site. As it turned out, the first thing that I wanted to do was decide if that was a sensible area to cover. And we planted ourselves on a really dense part of the site where we ended up getting 5 bags full of pottery. And we realized pretty quickly that was not going to be an appropriate way to deal with the site. So we scaled it down to a 1 meter tether. So 2 meter diameter circles at each of the collection points. So that was a quarter of that. So we're about 0.13 of the entire site once we get the entire site covered. Right now, we managed to get 60% of the site done in the month that we were there, which I take as a victory. I think that this was really good. And I can go into some details why I thought that was, why I do consider this a victory. But I also did want to say that, that episode 170, that was great because we had side discussions afterwards on the APN Slack, the Slack for the members. Yeah. And I was provide some very great ideas, some ways of simplifying some of my ideas, a few different ways of visualizing them. So it didn't radically change what I wanted to do, but it helped clarify what I was going to do, what I was going to try to do, and how I was going to approach it. And so, with that and some feedback I got from other members of the team, by the time we got into the field, I already knew exactly what we were going to do. We had kits ready. The software was all installed. Everything was ready to go. I'd written up instruction manuals so we could just jump in on it. And that was one of the big benefits, was actually just using this as a platform for myself, a little selfishly when, I've got this microphone in front of me, but it was to use this place as a platform for me to hone my ideas. And it really, really worked well for that.
Nice. So we're going to talk about, obviously we're going to get into this a little more, but what did you do any more drone work or anything while you were out there this time?
Yeah, I did some more drone work, nothing as intensive as what I did in the fall. Yeah. But, we can talk about this in a later segment, but I did drone work with the same drone setup that I had in the fall, which was a DJI Phantom 4 RTK. And we're using that for fairly large parts of the site and also some areas outside of the site, off of the teleproper, that is. And this is cool. So I'm definitely going to want to talk about it. But Sara Pizzimenti, who is one of the co-field directors, brought her DJI Mini drone, the original Mini.
Oh, yeah.
Which apparently she does a lot of field work all over. And she brings this along as a matter of course in order to do much finer grain mapping at the level of the trenches. And, I definitely want to talk about what she did with that because it kind of knocked my socks off.
Nice.
But before we get to that, let's talk a little more about the surface survey. So across that entire site with that 50 meter grid, there would have been 1,783 target locations. The first pass that you do with that iPad, that GPS-enabled iPad, if you're on the survey team, you land yourself on one of those points and you take a quick look and grade it, A, B, or C. Is it positive? Are there artifacts here? Is it negative? There are no artifacts here. Or is it a write-off? It's not in a good location for collecting. And that not in a good location could be a number of different reasons. It could be that, where I plotted these points on GIS, I plotted something off the site, like over in a farmer's field. That was one of the reasons to write off. Another reason to write off would be because it's just dirt roads, but there are paths that the cars drive over the site. If one of the points ended up in one of those paths, any collections you made from there would be pretty pointless. Yeah. The site has been excavated a number of times in the past. So there are old trenches and old spoil heaps. And obviously collecting surface collections from one of those locations would also be not the best thing, would skew the results. So those were write-offs as well. So we had this quick, green, red, gray, positive, negative write-off, and then collect everything within the catchment bag it, name the bag by the collection point. Again, they were all named uniquely. And then at the end of the project, I stopped with the survey a week before the project was over so that we could actually process all these bags. So of that 1,783 potential targets, we hit over 1,000 of them. So about 60% of the entire site was covered.
Jeez.
Which means that when we go back in the fall, we'll be able to finish that off pretty easily. And when I say I started out with the survey, and I did a few days of it myself until I was comfortable. I worked out a few little kinks, some things in the documentation that I figured could be done differently, a few things about procedure that I felt could be improved versus what my expectations were prior to going into it. And then I taught Zaid Arawi, who's another PhD researcher working on the project, and worked with him when I was comfortable with him. He helped me train in one of our representatives, Haider Saad, and worked with him for a couple of days. He trained in one of our other representatives, Abdul Khalik Jassim, and then the two of them, Haider and Abdul Khalik, just took off with it. Nice. and they ran through the site so fast. They put in such great work. And that really was for me a big win. That was that I could train and they could train and that we didn't have any real drop off in quality because the initial planning was so straightforward. And again, that initial planning was only so straightforward because I got to hone the ideas off of feedback that I got on the member Slack.
Nice. That's really cool. And I think that's a good sign of the sign of a good methodology, because it shouldn't be complex. It shouldn't be overly complex, right? It should be, straightforward. Here's what we're doing. Here's why we're doing it. And if you were able to, teach somebody that, and then they're able to pass that knowledge on as well, that's awesome. That's the way it should be, I think.
Yeah. And one of the really big things why I was able to pass on the knowledge of how to do it is that Haider and I, after he'd spent a couple of days with this, we sat down and we bilingualized the data collection. So, when I first wrote it, it was all in English, but now all the menu options, every pull down, everything that you could fill out was both in English and Arabic. And that made it easier for him to teach Abdul Khalik. But also I think that just as a matter of course, that is something important. It really rubbed me the wrong way that I was producing something for work in Iraq that only had an English front end to it. Yeah. So having this bilingual front end then meant that I felt like I was being more responsible, more courteous to the people whose country I was working in. And I think that it accounted for a better result in the end. Not just because he could train Abdul Khalik and they could do it quickly, but because he wasn't always guessing what exactly this English word was, right? He had helped me translate. So we'd actually gone through a fairly deep dive as to what the different things were, right?
Nice.
Why something might be a write-off.
Yeah.
It wasn't just a word on a piece of paper or in this case on an iPad. It was an actual discussion. Well, do we want to write off, animal burrows? Yeah, probably. Okay, well, why would that be? Well, that affects the site and it's churning up stuff from deeper underground. Okay. But, we had those discussions, which, the Haider, the other representatives, they're professionals. They understand this. They care for it, probably in a way that I couldn't ever hope to because it's their country. But having those discussions, we could think they honed my thoughts, I honed theirs, and we got together a better product in the end. And that product, again, being this data collection software, and I don't think I mentioned it yet today, but but I did mention it on episode 170 is that what I ended up settling on for the data collection software was ArcGIS field maps.
Okay.
And the reason was, I looked at a bunch of different data collection software, but University of Pennsylvania has a licensed ArcGIS, which gives them access to field maps. So I could install that. Meant no extra software cost. I could have done this in other mobile GIS packages, but that's what we went with. It was a little weird to set up initially, but once I got my brain around how it worked, how to set things up, that worked really nicely. And then again, I was able to bilingualize it because it didn't choke too badly on the bilingual stuff is often a problem, but it's really often a problem when you're working in another script that's right to left as opposed to left to right, right? So working with Arabic, which also has ligatures that don't exist in Latin languages, software either handles it or it chokes badly. And I only had a couple places where that field maps data collection was having a little bit of a trouble, not enough to cause any problems, but just enough to look a little funny in my eyes.
Nice. Yeah, that's something, getting both of those languages in there. First off, that's awesome to be able to see that. And then, yeah, having it does make sense to have it in the local language and to have it, just work like that. So I totally get that too.
Yeah, I think it's an ethical obligation to try to be as inclusive as possible. And that's something that, that Western researchers in the Middle East have long been dinged for, rightfully so, is that they go in and like with the colonial mindset that, hey, we know best and you have to adapt to us. And that said, I don't speak Arabic nearly as well as I should. And I'm very embarrassed by that. But I do recognize that that's something I have to work on and fix. And so in the little places I could, like bilingualizing the data collection, that's something that was fairly easily accomplished. But I think brought a much greater benefit than the effort it took.
Speaking Arabic is one thing, especially when you're around people, but can you read any Arabic too?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah,
that's very phonetic. So once you learn the characters and how they link together, one character to the other, what those ligatures are, you can probably get the pronunciation.
Okay.
Maybe not always, depending on a variety of factors. And once your vocabulary reaches a certain level, you can probably guess the meaning of words that you don't previously know. I'm maybe at the cusp of doing that, but I can't read much. So, I can read words, but not sentences. Let's put it that way.
Right. All right. Well, on that note, let's go ahead and take a break, and we'll come back and continue talking to Paul about his experiences on the Lagash archaeological project in Iraq this past month and a half or so. All right, back in a minute.
The Labor Day weekend sale is on at Tanger Outlets. Score up to 70% off at top brands like Nike Factory Store, Crocs, J. Crew Factory, Gap Outlet, and so many more. Refresh your wardrobe with the latest arrivals for less from all your favorite brands this Labor Day weekend. Tanger Outlets, always on trend, always on sale. Plan your trip at Tanger.com.
What's the easiest choice you can make? Window instead of middle seat? Picking a vendor who sends a great gift basket? Outsourcing business tasks you hate? What about selling with Shopify? Whether you're selling a little or a lot, Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. From the launch your online shop stage to the first real-life store stage, all the way to the did we just hit 1 million orders stage. Shopify's there to help you grow. Whether you're selling scented soap or offering outdoor outfits, Shopify helps you sell. Wherever and whatever you're selling, Shopify's got you covered. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/try. Go to shopify.com/try now to grow your business, no matter what stage you're in. Shopify.com/try.
Welcome back to the Archaeotech Podcast, episode 178. And we're talking with Paul about the Lagash Archaeological Project. And I was just wondering, Paul, do you got anything else you want to mention about the surface survey before we move on?
Yeah. So one of the other things I was mentioning about the positives, negatives, and write-offs, those are at the target locations. But we also realized that there are going to be other things that you encounter that aren't at the target locations. It might be an artifact that you want to note. It might be some destruction to the site. It could be any of a number of different things. Architectural features that are visible on the surface, that sort of stuff. So I created another database layer also in that same collection for notes. And those were very freeform. You write a little description, pull something, grab something from a pull down, take a photograph if you want. And with that, we had just about 700 notes ancillary to the main part of the surface survey because it became so effortless for us to do that. So if we'd see a drain or we would see part of a wall or something, no point not to just note it here. Here's a GPS coordinates. Here's a photograph of it. Keep on moving. It barely slowed down the main part of the survey and realized this is not systematic. But when you have, that 700 notes spread out over about half the site, about 60% of the site, if you look just at that layer, the whole map is blue with all these note markers. So that was kind of cool. And then there are a couple other things. I developed it so that it didn't take much expertise to be able to do the surface survey, the collection part. And the idea was that I wanted it to be as reproducible as possible, not to be as dumb as possible. I wanted to be able to have Hyder's results and my results be virtually identical, right?
Yeah.
And if we were to bring you out in the field, Chris, your results would be virtually identical, because there wouldn't be a whole lot of thinking. There wouldn't be a whole lot of picking up objects and looking at them and say, oh, is this piece of slag big enough for me to bring in? Oh, is this potsherd diagnostic or not? Now, we offloaded all that to the field processing, which is what I did for the last week. So basically each one of these bags, we went and I devised a data collection, what's the right word, form in WildNote. And we sit down and count and weigh each of the classes of objects. So slag, simple ware pottery, storage ware pottery, stone, lithics, non-lithic stone, I just, and then the idea was to be able to make heat maps of those at the end in GIS. And that went really well. So we processed all, but I missed, I think, 28 or 29 of the bags. I just ran out of time at the end.
Jeez.
So we got almost everything processed in the same field season that we did all the data collection. And a few days ago, I generated heat maps of the kinds of distributions that I thought were significant, with pottery, with slag, and with stones and lithics, not aggregated together. So those heat maps, I think, show us where different kinds of activities were happening on the site. So we'll still have to have a group meeting to discuss what I mapped with that. But again, proof of concept, this was pretty quick and easy. And importantly, I think it'll be pretty reproducible, right? So we have that. But then the other cool thing, and this, I know that you get upset sometimes talking about objects, but our archaeologists, even if they get upset with the object-centricness of a lot of it, also like objects and artifacts. True. So in the surface survey, at one of the locations, we found a cylinder seal on the surface.
Wow, okay.
And the pottery distribution there was odd. And one of the police guards that was with me that day came up as I was making the collection at the target, and from a short distance away, he showed me what he found on the surface, which was a human finger bone.
Okay.
So I think that we may have located the ancient cemetery of the site. Just from the surface survey. We obviously will have to go back and look at it. And I didn't get the chance to bring any of my colleagues out there to take a closer look at it. But I think I can make a strong argument for why this is where at least a cemetery was located. And then another thing that came up that was really cool was one of the reasons why we're looking at slag, for example, is we want to get a sense of where the production areas, where the industrial areas of the site were. And that's why I was saying stone and lithics. What I found was that I'd find lots of little multicolored pebbles, jaspers and various like quartz and things. But where I tended to find those, I also found a lot of lithics, which I'm not sure why those two tended to go together, but they seem to be some sort of correlation. Looking at slag, looking at the distribution of the stones, we can get some sense perhaps of where the ancient work areas were on the site. One of the things that we found, which was really cool, was a nice big hunk of lapis lazuli. About 4 centimeters long, maybe a little longer. Yeah. And so that's this vivid blue stone. It was used a lot in statuary and in cylinder seals and jewelry in ancient Mesopotamia. And it's not native from there. It's brought in all the way from Afghanistan.
Wow.
So, so 4,500 years ago, somebody trekked a long way to get that stone, or that stone trekked a long way through a lot of hands to get from where it's found to where it was going to be worked into something. And this big piece of unworked stone tells us that, there's some sort of lapidary workshop in that spot or near to that spot where I collected it. And that brings up then another thing, that we want to have a social media presence on the site, which meant, for the most part, Twitter for us. So I posted the cylinder seal, did not post the human bone, which also wasn't from one of the target collections, but I did post a picture of that lapis lazuli. And that, I think, has had more engagement than any other post I've ever had of people really excited by it. Because if it's something that it's something that everybody knows and everybody loves, like, ooh, that's a great piece of lapis. But it also, aside from just being something really interesting to look at, does potentially tell us about what was going on in the past on the site, and where that kind of activity was happening. So that was useful. And and it was good to have the social media presence. It was mostly Reed Goodman, myself, and Dr. Augusta McMahon, who is the other co-field director of the project, posting on Twitter. But all of our posts got a lot of engagement, and there's now a lot of Iraqi archaeologists posting on Twitter as well. So there was a lot of back and forth between us and them, mostly likes, but a few questions here and there. Hey, where did you find that? What's it like? Does it compare to what we've been finding? But it's interesting to me because it forms then this whole fairly new channel for communication amongst scholars that's not in a regular scholarly venue, and is also open to the public. So the public can see what we're doing in a very open and accessible way. Yeah. So I thought that was also a valuable kind of side effect of what we were doing.
I mean, I think it's really valuable for the public to see like the scientific process happening in real time. You know what I mean? Because it's always sort of smoke and mirrors for people who don't understand what's happening. And I think it's one good thing that Twitter is actually really good for. Yeah,
it's not just for getting into political fights with people, and also there's also some good collaboration that happens there. Speaking of seeing things happening real time on the scientific process, where are you with the editing of the Archaeology show? And for our listeners, we decided to try something interesting, new to us, is that 4 of us on the project decided to record a podcast episode for the Archaeology show while we were in the field. And we decided that it would be interesting to try to break it up, not do it as a one shot, but record it in 3 different segments at 3 different times of the season. So we recorded the first segment fairly early at the start of the project with what our hopes and expectations would be. Next one in the middle of the project with a progress update, what's worked, what hasn't. And then the final one, wrap up, which we kept on getting bumped. The last few days were hectic, which always happens on projects. So we couldn't get everybody together. Finally, 3 of us in the airport were together and decided to record the final episode in the waiting room at the gate. So your editing is going to be lots of fun. I'm sure the sound levels are different every time.
Yes. Well, that podcast will have already been out by the time people are hearing this. So
awesome.
Because it's going to come out on Sunday. We're recording this on Thursday before it comes out. So let me check the episode number on that real quick. But because of my schedule and how things are working, I haven't actually edited the damn thing yet. I'm planning on doing it tomorrow, actually. Yeah, tomorrow is my editing hole for TAS right now this week. But it's going to be episode 168. So just look for that. And like I said, it will have come out the Sunday prior to this releasing. So if you're listening to this in real time, it is already out. Well, if you're listening to this anytime, it's already out. So episode 168. And we'll probably try to link to that episode in the show notes for this one. I'll have to remember to do that because I can't do that until that one posts. So, I kind of can. So anyway, that's neither here nor there. I'm wondering real quick before I lose this thought in my head, the finger bone. So you know for a fact it was human? Like there's indisputable?
I am not a bone specialist, so I don't know indisputably, but it certainly looked like it to me. And I took a picture and everybody that I showed it to said, oh yeah, that's people.
Because I know you're on a really ancient site and there is a cemetery there. You guys know that there's one there. So because you're saying you may have found it, just because of this finger bone. But man, any other archaeological site in the United States, it doesn't matter where it is or how old we think it is. If remains are found and maybe you didn't know you were going to find remains or you're not in like a confirmed cemetery setting right now, it's like everything shuts down and the authorities are called in. Now, with it being one of the police there that actually found the bone, I'm guessing it was all great. But was there just no procedure because of where you're at and what you're expecting to find? Or is there just no real procedure around that to begin with, unless you guys say something?
I'm not sure what the actual rules are. So somebody who knows better should chime in and correct me on the Slack or on Twitter. But we definitely have to treat human remains with care and respect.
Sure.
And they have to be recorded with the Antiquities Authority, but I don't know what happens after that. I do know that we had 3 trenches open, 10 by 10s. Actually, one was 10 by 15. And we encountered at least 5 burials, human burials in those trenches. So, some of them were intact. One was a flex burial with a small jar buried with the person. Another one was 2, maybe 3 people totally commingled, spread out across a couple different rooms in the trench that we were excavating. So, different kinds of post-depositional processes there.
Sure.
We're not sure why the 1 or 2 or however many bodies got scattered so badly, but obviously the other ones were fairly intact burials.
Okay.
All those bones are in storage, and I don't know if their final disposition is to go back to Baghdad or what happens. It's never been something I've dealt with in the past, so it's all new to me. But yeah, I'm confident. I'd give it 95% confidence that was a human finger bone.
Okay.
And back to the social media. So in addition to this podcast that we decided, in addition to Twitter and this podcast, which we decided would be an interesting experiment, what's it like on a project? Mm-hmm. Dr. Brad Hafford, who's on the project, he also has his own YouTube channel devoted to archaeology, and he had been videotaping everything on the project and was going to put together some videos for that. So we have a multi-pronged approach to that, which I'm hoping gets some traction. I hope it shows people that good field work, which is what I think we did, is a really collaborative process between a bunch of different people with a bunch of different skills and insights and aptitudes that can work together to try to reach a common goal. The goal isn't a set, hey, we found this or we did that, but we together learned something about this site and about how people in the past lived here. So I'm just going to, in passing, mention one of the other projects on this project, which was Reed Goodman's soil cores. And I mention it because with the social media, that's the reason why we only had 3 of us rather than the 4 of us who were recording the other segments of that episode. Only 3 of us were at the airport that day because Zaid al-Rawi had to spend an extra week up in Baghdad negotiating with the antiquities authorities and with customs. There was some disconnect between the 2 of them in order to get soil cores back out of the country.
Okay.
And so when I was there in the fall, I was there to do the mapping, but I was also there to support Reed in collecting soil cores. And I did that, but then he couldn't bring them out of the country, even though he thought he had all the permissions. So he and Zaid both had to stick around for an extra week and a couple days at the end of this project in order for Zaid to work his magic, which I'm really pleased to say he managed to in the end. And they arrived a couple days ago, soil cores in hand. Nice. And we're all absolutely elated that happened.
Wow. I mean, I think of soil core, I think of like 20-meter long, tube. How big are these soil cores that they had?
Right. So, I mean, that is what happened. So Reed is looking at long-term changes in the environment in southern Iraq and trying to get a sense of what the environment was like when these cities started to congeal, when they started to be cities. And the idea kind of being, and this isn't his idea, but the idea is that, we learned that as kids in middle school that these tell sites form because they've got irrigation canals to bring water into the fields and whatnot around the cities. But it's beginning to look like it was a much marshier, wetter environment with the headwaters of the Gulf farther north than they currently are in antiquity. And so this was a much more marshy, riverine, lacustrine, estuary kind of environment. And so some of these canals may not have been to bring water in, but may have been to bring water out. Okay. So anyhow, he's looking at long-term changes through time with these soil cores, and he's done them in a bunch of different places. And you're right. The big one, he hired a company that does environmental testing that did a soil core that I think went down about 25 meters.
Wow.
And so you don't bring out a 25 meter long chunk of soil. You bring out ones that are about a half meter long each. Yeah. Sections of it. Right. And each one is recorded from this depth to that depth and this depth to that depth. And they're all recorded with their locations. And, and because we hired this company and they wanted to show what they were doing with archaeology, I flew the drone to take some glamour shots of them at work.
Nice.
And, and so again, it was a collaborative process and those guys were awesome. in the fall, we tried doing cores and we were just plagued by problems. But these guys, the company was RSK, which is an Iraqi-based company, and they were the consummate professionals. I showed up to work with them. They're like, get away from the perimeter. And there was, the yellow tape here. Here's the zero plugs. Here's the hard hat. You can't come within this area without wearing the hard hat. And you could see they were a well-oiled team. The four of these men working together, they just knew what to do. And even then, it took them, I think, 5 days of drilling to get down that 25 meters.
Wow.
With their training and their expertise and their equipment.
Jeez. Yeah, a little different than the soil cores you were using back in the fall, isn't it?
Yeah. Really much more professional setup than what we were doing.
Yeah. All right. Well, that is the end of the segment. Let's call it there, and we'll come back on the other side and wrap up this discussion. Back in a minute.
We've got a contest. The folks over at AEO Screen are giving one of our listeners a brand new screen. Pick anything from their website and they'll ship it to you. Not an archaeologist? No problem. These are great for gardening and other tasks around the house. I mean, come on, right? Anyway, these are great screens and you won't be disappointed. We'll pick the winning entry at the end of May. Head over to archpodnet.com/screen for details on how to enter. It's easy and you can get multiple entries. Increase your chances by helping out others. That's archpodnet.com/screen for details on how to win.
Well, we got a minute. I'm going to buy that truck I've been wanting.
Wait, don't you need weeks to shop for a car?
I don't. Carvana makes it super convenient to find exactly what I want.
Hold up. You're buying a car on your phone? Isn't that more of a laptop thing?
You can shop wherever you want.
I like to do my research, read reviews, compare models. Plus, Carvana has thousands of options. How'd you decide on that truck?
Because I like it.
Oh, that is a great reason.
Go to Carvana.com to sell your car the convenient way.
Welcome back to the Archaeotech Podcast, episode 178. And I hope over the commercial break there that you guys poured your drinks. I've got my Mexican whiskey here with me. Probably shouldn't because I'm still coming out of a cold, but I think we're going to talk drones.
You've got whiskey for a drone discussion?
I do indeed.
It's probably a really bad
idea. It's a really bad idea. So you mentioned you brought your drone back out, and we've talked about one of the other people out there brought a drone out as well. Two very different drones doing two very different things. So let's talk about what you guys are doing with those.
Right. So I was mapping at a macro level, not fully at the level that I did over the fall when I was mapping the entirety of the site, but I would fly at 100 meters, different blocks of the site. Mm-hmm. And this was for a variety of reasons. Chief amongst is that the soil conditions, it was not rainy when we were there, but it had been raining prior to us getting there, meant that the architecture, just subsurface, the ancient architecture, was really visible from the air. So I programmed a couple routes that I would fly, blocks of the site that I would do, every couple of days. And then I would take all those, make ortho mosaics of them with drone deploy and hand those over to the site architect, who was going absolutely blind nightly. Not because of that, going blind nightly because he would sit up looking at these ortho mosaics and plotting out where he could see walls and streets and other features of various types, subsurface. You can't really see them when you're walking on the site. In some cases you can, but for the most part you can't. But as soon as you get up 100 meters, some of them pop. I mean, there's no denying. You're like, oh yeah, there's a house, there's a city wall, there's this, there's that. Look at this street. It runs through this whole neighborhood. All sorts of great stuff like that. And this isn't anything new. This is stuff that people have been doing with drones to some extent, but definitely with aerial photographs like corona imagery for quite a while now.
Yeah.
But it was really effortless for me to just program this flight route and do the exact same flight route today, tomorrow, first thing in the morning, end of the day, whatever, and then just hand them to Mark, the architect, and let him work on what he could see. So we're going to circle back with that. Also see how that interrelates with any of the stuff that we found on the surface survey, right? If we can start to see patterns in the kinds of buildings that there are in relation to the kinds of artifacts that we find in the surface survey. So, that's what I was doing. On one of the flights, I noticed part of the city wall, and we know where parts of the city wall is, but this is an extension that we hadn't seen. And it was so clear that my jaw dropped when I saw it on the screen on the iPad while I was flying.
Yeah.
So, the reps were nearby working on their part of my surface survey. And so when they finished up, I called them over to go show them, and they were really excited too. But after I saw it from the air, we could see it crystal clear on the ground. I mean, you could practically cut yourself on these lines. They were flat, but one part, that's where the wall is. And here's where the city gate is. And here's inside the wall, and there's the glacis or something on the other side. So that was really exciting that we could use this real time. It's not like going and looking at old satellite imagery, old spy photos, whatever. It was, hey, could you check this area? And so then alongside with that same, kind of mid-level scale drone mapping, Zaid was also really interested in what's happening off of the main tell of Lagash, because there are a number of small features, small tells all around. So I flew those so that he could have those mapped as well. And he identified a few new sites that had not been previously documented, including one which was really thrilling to me, had a fair amount of Uruk period pottery on it, which is really amazing. I mean, if you don't know what the Uruk is, it's it is the time period of the 4th millennium BCE where writing is developed, where these cities really congeal into these big things. So this is very old and very interesting in Mesopotamian history. And I keep on using the word interesting. I should find a better word. Very important, very significant in Mesopotamian history, but also to a large extent to world history beyond that, because this is some of the first time that people are doing this sort of stuff anywhere in the world. So finding that site and being able to map it was also really, really cool. And we mapped it, again, effortlessly from the sky. Mm-hmm. The other effortless thing, and this blew me away more than anything I did, frankly, was, like I said, Sada had brought in this DJI Mavic Mini, the original Mavic Mini, which she has done to other projects. She's a very active field archaeologist. And so I was like, what are you going to do with that? She's like, I'm going to map this, the trench at the end of the day. And that's what she was doing. She was just popping it up in the sky, flying it for 10 minutes, and taking a couple dozen shots of her trench from a bunch of different angles.
That's awesome.
Bring that back down into the lab at the end of the day, load it up in Metashape, and generate photogrammetry of her trench day by day. Yeah. Which I know that people do that, but I didn't realize the kind of casualness that she could bring to it. Of just, this is what I do. It's no different than you doing a sketch map at every day, except for it's much more highly accurate than that sketch map. And you can rotate it around this way and that way. And if you're doing it every day, you can compare today against tomorrow, against the day after, with colors and textures and such. And then you can also hand it back to the architect, who can then go and do your nice finished site plans, trench maps at any particular phase based off of those photogrammetric models, which was... wow, real value add to me. This absolutely should be in everybody's toolbox. Not sure about Metashape. That's expensive, but there are other options too. I'm playing with WebODM at home to see if I can accomplish something similar. But, again, it's the casualness of, this is the tool I use. And she's adept, but not a tech heavy person, just sure. Like, why wouldn't I use it? I use a camera. This camera happens to be mounted on an airplane, and it takes a bunch of pictures I can then run through the software and turn it into a model. End of story. Yeah.
And it's great that the drone itself is no longer like the technological impediment to doing something like this, right? It really is the processing software that you actually do something with all those images. But that in itself is, just through time, there's going to be more options. Metashape is expensive, and a lot of people aren't going to use that unless they're, associated with a university or something like that, or can just afford it. But like you said, there are some other options out there that can be used, but it's easy enough just to throw. I've got one of those DJI Mavic Minis. It actually sits up in the cabinet above our driver's seat in the RV and we can pull it out pretty much at any time. The batteries stay pretty well charged, and it's I can just pull it out. I can have it up flying in probably 2 or 3 minutes if I wanted to. And it's super easy to just take out, throw it up in the air and let it fly. And it uses hardly any energy for that effort. And in fact, if she had the standard like 3 battery package,
which I mean,
depending on how much she was using it, she probably didn't even need to charge those batteries more than once every few days, if that, depending on how often she was doing those images. So
they were using it on all 3 trenches, and I think that they were only dipping into the second battery.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. Yep, they're so efficient,
and that was awesome. The one caveat I will say about this particular model is that one of the days it stopped working. It would not turn on.
The whole drone just wouldn't turn on.
The whole drone would not turn on.
Wow.
So since I'd already demonstrated my technical chops by fixing the washing machine, that's a different story. She's like, hey, Paul, can you fix this? And I'm like, well, yes or no. Those are the answers. But if you don't mind me tearing it apart, I can see what I can do. So I found a couple of videos online. And one of them, somebody was saying, oh, yeah, it's really easy for dirt to get into the power button. And then it behaves this way. And what he showed was exactly what I had. So I tore it apart, grabbed a bunch of alcohol wipe pads, and I squeezed that isopropyl alcohol, because we didn't have any, into the button and worked it through there and let it dry off, and it worked fine. And so then after that, they did 2 things. One is that they always kept it in a plastic bag when it was out on the site, because it's a very dusty site. And the other is that Mark started doing a cleaning routine every couple of days on it. Blowing it out, cleaning up the some of the moving parts with some of the electrical spray. I don't know if you've seen that, but people use it on things like potentiometers that they get crackly if they get a little corroded, right? So he was using that, and it worked great the whole rest of the time. So that's what I would add as the caveat, is that if you're using something like that, be casual about it. But if you're a little too casual, then you'll run into trouble.
Well, yeah, some feedback on the last episode of this with Daniel. I forgot how to pronounce his last name. Carvalho, I think it was. He is doing robotics and archaeology. Robotics as related to archaeology, and he's literally building a robot in Portugal, where he's at, and he's one of the feedback pieces that we got from one of our longtime fans. And somebody who's an engineer and knows these types of things. He's like, yeah, your biggest problem is going to be dirt. He's like, it's great and all getting a robot out to do archaeology, but how are you going to keep it clean? Because these things just like fail immediately when they get dirty. And when you said the drone wouldn't turn on as an avionics technician, I was going to be like, yeah, if it doesn't power on, it's got one of 2 problems. It's either not getting power, so it's in the power bay, those contacts are dirty or something like that, or it's the button that actually turns it on. I mean, those are really, the 2 places to start. I mean, the worst case scenario is it's some circuit board failure, but it's almost never that, right? It's going to be something a little more simple. So, but yeah, keeping that stuff clean is a good lesson for everybody to listen to.
Well, the trick with the DJI stuff, for anybody that hasn't used one, is that to turn on or off their equipment, their drones in particular, it's like hold it for half a second, release for half a second, and then hold it for 2 seconds. So it's this whole funny timing dance that you have to do with the power button. Yeah. And I've used a bunch of their equipment, and some of them are easy and some of them are extremely tricky. And so this wasn't, it was working one day and then stopped working. It got a little finicky and got a little more finicky. But whether or not it would be finicky, it was hard to tell, because was it the first press that was not depressing fully, or was it the second long press that was not depressing fully?
Right.
So it didn't act like a power button issue per se, because the power button essentially is 2 power buttons.
Right.
Because of the way you have to operate it. So it was a little tricky to diagnose, but as soon as I saw that video, I was like, oh, that's it. And and that one on that video was really disgusting on the inside. Ours was just mildly dusty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Nice. Well, at least you caught it ahead of time is what you did. So, and then had procedures around it. So, all right. Well, what do we have left to talk about in your procedures out there? What would you change you guys are going back out again. Did everything work well enough that you want to continue on with your methodology, or are you going to bring something new or lose something that didn't quite work well?
Yeah. So in terms of the surface survey, the data collection worked brilliantly. I'm really happy with that. The data processing, I had, like I said, I started building out a form in WildNote. Actually, we used it, but I had enough requests for different things on it that it got a little unwieldy.
Yeah.
I couldn't craft them in a way that I wanted, and then exporting the data meant that I had to remerge data in database afterwards. None of that was a problem, but what I would do is I would redesign that data processing form going forward, which is fine because I can, finish those last 29 or 30 bags, whatever it was, and then move to a new form. Just re-aggregate the questions in a slightly different way, and then it'll be easier to process. The other thing that probably was the biggest failure was we brought along a thermal imaging camera, a FLIR boson. And we also purchased a gimbal setup so that we could attach it to that Phantom drone and fly it and do some thermal imaging. The idea being that we could see with the naked eye, with the camera mounted on the drone, we could see the subsurface architecture. We wanted to see if there was if there were different heat signatures for the subsurface architecture versus the matrix that they were in. And the answer is yes, but I had a lot of trouble with that gimbal system. I'm not going to throw the company under the bus, but the instructions were terrible. It was not balanced right and could not be balanced right. There was a way of like loosening a screw and adjusting the camera left and right to adjust the roll. And I could not adjust it far enough for this very light FLIR boson camera.
Okay.
So I brought all that back, and I'm going to redesign all the pieces. So last night I was making a new arm for the gimbal, a shorter one, so that the balance should be better. So we'll see how that works. Another issue that I ran into is I got the lens on the boson has a 13-degree field of view, which based off of what I could find online, what I could find on the website of the company that sold the camera, I thought that was an appropriate angle. What it turns out is that it's way too narrow of a view for doing large neighborhood level kind of views of the site.
Okay.
What it did work well at the trenches, right? And we could actually see subsurface architecture that had, that they were going to run into tomorrow. And we could see the continuation of walls that we found in the trench outside of the trenches. But I had a lot of trouble with that gimbal setup. It would freak out and go all twitchy and then point who knows which direction. So I'm redesigning that. Another problem related to the poor instructions was that I was told that I could capture the video on a video screen, a little handheld video monitor. So it would transmit via radio from the drone down to this monitor. And I could capture on that, and I could, but the quality was really bad. Very pixelated, lots of artifacts, lots of random lines running through it. Was not happy with that at all. The control either for the gimbal or else the radio for projecting that imagery back to the monitor interfered with the controller of the drone. So if I'd get it past about 100 meters from me, the drone would lose signal and then try to return home.
Oh, geez. Yeah.
Yeah, not exactly ideal. Toward the end, when I'd basically given up on it, to counteract the balance, what I ended up doing is I took some very thick metal wire that I found, and I made a little bracket that I glued onto the gimbal that I attached a AAA battery to. As a counterbalance. And that worked okay, but obviously that's kludgy beyond belief. So that's why I'm redesigning parts of it. So I wanted to see if I could capture the video directly on board on the airplane. So I programmed a Raspberry Pi to capture video off of the second video port from the camera because it has two, and that worked well. And so I came up with an idea of using a Raspberry Pi Zero to do that next time. And then I started Googling, maybe there's a device I can buy that'll do that I can mount directly rather than have to do this with the Raspberry Pi Zero and the extra battery that's going to have to bring and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And I found an article about somebody describing different things. And one of the things they had in there was a picture of of three different models of this onboard DVR kind of device that you could have. And one of those models I recognized because there was an empty case of that in the box with the gimbal. I had no idea what it was. It was just a clear plastic case, no markings. But I'm like, oh, that's the same clear plastic case that, and I went and I looked, and one of the little buried circuit boards on that gimbal assembly was a little onboard DVR.
Oh, geez.
So the solution that I concocted with the Raspberry Pi Zero was unnecessary. I could record things directly on the DVR on board. So I guess that's good to know. Anyhow, long story short, this was not a success, but I learned a lot, and I have some ideas that might make it a success, when we go back in the fall. So I'm redesigning parts, and hopefully, we'll have some better results, next time.
Okay. All right. Well, that is just about all the time for this show. I'm sure that if anything else comes around on this and we want to bring it up, we'll talk about it in future shows. But otherwise, this was really cool to have kind of bookend and then have the middle portion here, like on the Archaeology show. I'm really looking forward to actually editing that here in the next couple of days so I can hear it, because that's going to be really fun.
Be careful what you wish for.
Yeah. And, the things people have to remember is, this podcast, this episode of the Archaeology show was recorded, in real life, right? And not sitting in an office with a microphone somewhere. Is recorded in the field in multiple areas and an airport, and just
water buffaloes in the background, all sorts of stuff.
Exactly. So that is pretty cool, and I hope people understand that. So
yeah, I hope that they get the content of it. We had great discussions around what work we were doing. And again, it was such a good team to work with. They were really enthusiastic and helpful and supportive of each other. So it was a lot of fun to just sit back for half an hour and chat about what we thought about what we were doing.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. All right. Well, thanks a lot, Paul. This has been awesome. And I hope we can, again, when you go back out, do it again sometime. I know you got some other interesting field work coming up too, and maybe we can talk about that as well.
Certainly.
All right. Well, thanks everybody. And we will see you next time.
Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Archaeotech podcast. Links to items mentioned on the show are in the show notes at www.archpodnet.com/archaeotech. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com and paul@lugal.com. Support the show by becoming a member at archpodnet.com/members. The music is a song called Off Road and is license free from Apple. Thanks for listening.
This episode was produced by Chris Webster from his RV traveling the United States, Tristan Boyle in Scotland, DigTech LLC, Culturo Media, and the Archaeology Podcast Network, and was edited by Chris Webster.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Thanks for listening. Please consider joining our growing core of members over at archpodnet.com/members. If you liked what you heard, consider leaving a review wherever you're listening to this.
Okay, you can do this.
I know. Carvana makes it so convenient to sell your car. It's just hard to let go. My car and I have been through so much together.
But look, you already have a great offer from Carvana. That was fast.
Well, I know my license plate and VIN by heart, and those questions were easy.
You're almost there. Now to just accept the offer and schedule a pickup or drop-off.
How'd you do it? How are you so strong in letting go of your car?
Well, I already made up my mind, and Carvana's so easy.
Yeah, true. And sold.
Go to Carvana.com to sell your car the convenient way.
The Labor Day weekend sale is on at Tanger Outlets. Score up to 70% off at top brands like Nike Factory Store, Crocs, J. Crew Factory, Gap Outlet, and so many more. Refresh your wardrobe with the latest arrivals for less from all your favorite brands this Labor Day weekend. Tanger Outlets, always on trend, always on sale. Plan your trip at Tanger.com.